Welcome to ePathshala PG courses on computer science. We will see about the next module called XML RPC. The objective of this module is to discuss about the XML RPC model. We will see about the concept of Java based middleware that supports this XML RPC. We will also look into the advantages and disadvantages while developing this XML RPC. So, before going into this XML RPC, we will have a brief overview of RPC. We know that this RPC is a remote procedure call, which is a model that specifies how two cooperating processes that runs in a different nodes in a heterogeneous computing environment can communicate and coordinate activities. And this paradigm of RPC is based on the concept of a procedure call in any higher level language, higher level programming language. And the semantics of RPC are also identical to the semantics of the traditional procedure call. So, traditionally we make a procedure call by value or call by reference. So, this the RPC is also like making a procedure call, but it is going to be a remote procedure call that runs in a different machine. And if you look into the difference between the normal procedure call and the remote procedure call. So, this normal procedure call would be using the same memory space and it would be running in a single system, but this RPC takes place between processes on that runs in a client and a server, and the two in a heterogeneous computing environment. Now, when you make an ordinary procedure call, we pass parameters by value or we can pass parameters by reference. So, when we pass parameters by value, the copy of it would be placed on the stack and that can be the value can be used or modified by the procedure, but it would not be reflected in the original variable. But when you pass the reference of the variable or the parameter, we are actually passing the address of the parameter and it is passed to the procedure. So, any use of this parameter within the procedure would actually modify the variable or the parameter in that address. So, that would actually reflect the changes what we make within the procedure. So, what happens with the remote procedure call? The remote procedure call would act like a procedure call, but it would act across the network. So, here the process makes a remote procedure call by pushing its parameters and a return address onto the stack, and it would jump to the start of the procedure. So, here the remote procedure itself is responsible for accessing and using the network. And once the remote execution is over, the procedure jumps back to the return address, and now the calling process will then continue with the executing the remaining statements. So, here whenever you make a remote procedure call, this would make a push the parameters and it would go to the start of the procedure would execute it and then would return the result back to the calling process or the calling procedure. Now, so what we have seen is this RPC is a remote procedure call that would run between two different systems. Let us take like a client and a server, and that would be in a heterogeneous computing environment. So, using this RPC we can develop a distributed application. So, here with RPC you can also pass parameters and pass parameters to the remote procedure. The remote procedure would execute and give back the result back to the calling procedure. Now, let us see what is this XML RPC. So, XML RPC is a simple protocol that uses XML messages to perform this remote procedure call. So, this is basically developed through this XML and HTTP protocol. So, here all the requests would be encoded in XML as XML messages and it would be sent via the HTTP protocol. And the response again from the remote procedure would also be encoded in XML format and it would be received through this HTTP protocol in the sender side. So, the XML RPC is the foundation, or it would be the easiest way to get started with the web services. So, to understand about the web services, let us first understand about the XML RPC. So, as I told you, XML RPC provides an XML and HTTP based mechanism, and that would make a remote procedure call or for making method or function calls across a network. So, it uses the two protocols called XML protocol and the HTTP protocol. So, it uses XML for messaging, and it makes use of the small vocabulary set of the XML, not the entire one, and it uses the HTTP to pass the information from a client computer to a server computer. And here we do not have any notion of objects, nothing to talk about objects here, and we do not know mechanism for including information that uses other XML vocabularies. So, just the messages are passed as XML messages, and HTTP protocol is used to pass the information from one end to the other end. And this kind of mechanism started very early in 1998. And to develop this XML RPC program, this is a very easiest way to test an RPC mechanism that is supported by Apache. So, in real applications we do not directly program the XML statements. So, when you develop an XML RPC, we do not write any code in XML, and we'll in need of an library. That library is called as an XML RPC library, where you have, this is an API where you have classes and methods, and we will be making some function calls through this library. And coming to working with XML RPC, we have Apache's XML project called Apache XML RPC that provides the packages for integrating this XML RPC with Java. So, once we are very convenient working with Java, we can test this RPC mechanism, very easiest way to work with RPC provided by Java. So, we have the package supported by Apache XML RPC. Once you download the packages and have it in your machine, we can easily write an RPC code using this packages, using the classes and methods that we can use it from this package. So, Java provides a simple mechanism to test with XML RPC. And the advantage of this Apache XML RPC, we have seen about RMI. In RMI we have to do the registration process, that is the client has to register the remote method to the registry. But XML, when you come into the XML RPC, this provides an automated registration process which would add the methods to the XML RPC server. And we write a server program, but we do not need to have a server. We do not write the entire thing. So, we have a built-in web server with XML RPC that only speaks XML RPC, reducing the need for creating the full servlet. We do not write the entire servlet code for developing. So, we have a built-in server called web server that is coming with a package. We will be using it for writing the server code and starting the server. And the another thing what you have to do is we have to write a client package that would make a call to the remote methods. That would also be very fairly, it is very simple. So, to prepare for this XML RPC services, there are 4 steps we have to do. The first step, we have to develop the function that is going to be used by the client. So, the remote function or the remote procedure, here we call it as a remote procedure, that has to be used by the client would be first developed, and we have to create the server, and we have to register the function to the server and start the server. Now, we will have a client application that would make use of this remote procedure. So, now coming to this XML RPC, let us see an example that would actually help us to understand how this XML RPC is going to be programmed and it will work. So, the first step, we have to develop the function, the remote procedure. So, here we can see that we create a function called circle area. So, the entire thing is basically a Java programming. Once we are very convenient with Java programming language, this XML RPC is nothing else. It is very easy to learn. So, we can create a class called area handler, within which we will have a method. This is the remote procedure circle area, that is going to take the radius of the circle and it would return the area of the circle. So, we have written the pi r square compute the pi r square, and we would return the area of the circle. So, this method would get the radius of a circle and it would return the area of the circle. So, it's a very simple method that is defined within a class called area handler. And now the next step what you have to do is we have to write a server program. So, in order to write the server program, we have to first import the libraries that is available with the package, the Apache package. So, here we can see that we have to import the package called org.apache.xml-rpc.star, and the class which we are going to use within this package, XML-RPC package, is the web server. So, specifically we have said that we will import the class web server from this XML package, XML-RPC package. The next one we are going to use a class called XML-RPC. So, these are the two important classes we will use from the package called XML-RPC package. So, first step we have to import these libraries before you write the server code. And now we create a server code and we are going to write a register function, register the function with the server. So, we write a server called area server, we define a class called area server, and now we from the main method we are going to call the method called start server. So, the start server takes one parameter which is the port number, we will give it in the command line. So, when you execute the server program, in the command line we will give the port number where the server would be running. So, we will call a method called start server, and you can see that we define a method called start server and we pass the port number. So, within the start server we are going to write a simple code where you are going to instantiate an object for the web server. So, I told you there are two important classes you are going to use from the XML-RPC package. One the web server class, other one is the XML-RPC. So, this is the web server, here we are going to use it. So, web server we instantiate an object for the web server, and here you can see that we get the port number from in the command line. So, whatever we get it from the command line are going to be string. So, the string has to be converted, parsed to an integer. So, we use integer.parseInt to parse this, convert the string to integer, and we create the web server. Now this web server would be running in this port number. So, whatever port number you give it in the command line. So, once you do it, we are going to bind it. So, we register the class under the name called area. So, here to the web server dot we use a method called add handler. So, the add handler method would now create an instance of the area handler. So, what is area handler? Area handler is the function, is a class which has the function that calculates find out the area of the circle. So, we instantiate an object for that remote procedure, the remote class, and then we bind it with a name called area. And once you bind the remote function, we will start the server using the start method. So, remember we have to first create a web server, we have to use the method called add handler to register the function to the server, and we have to start the server using the start method. Now, assuming that we have compiled the area server class. So, area server is the server class we have created. So, once you compile it, assuming that we have a class file, we are going to run this server. So, now the server would be running in the port number 8899. So, what we have done is we have returned the remote procedure and we have written a server program. To the server program you have binded the remote procedure. So, once you have the remote procedure binded with the server program, we are going to develop the client program. So, the client program we need to write the client program which would call the function registered in the server side. So, we will write a simple client program. In order to write the client program, we have to first import all these libraries. The important classes we are going to use it in the client program. So, import the package org.apache.xml-rpc. The class which are very useful to write the client program are XML-RPC class. Then we will use a class called XML-RPC client, and we will also use a class called XML RPC exception to handle the exceptions that are thrown in this client program. So, these are the three things that would be very useful for developing the client program. Now, coming here, we write the client program called area client. So, we have the main method. So, first you create an instance of this area client, and what we are going to do is we are going to take the radius from the command line when you execute the client program. Now, the command line argument is a string parameter. It has to be passed as a double value to the remote procedure, because the remote procedure takes the radius as a double value and returns the area as a double value. So, here convert the string, use the parse double method of the Java of the wrapper class double, and then convert the string to a double value. So, now you have a radius which is a double value. Now, this radius with this radius you are going to call the method called area circle. So, this client area client is the client program you are writing it. You instantiate an object called client. So, this object dot area circle. So, area circle is the one which we are going to see in the next slide. So, you write a program to define the method called area circle, and once you call this area circle passing the radius, you will get the result. So, the area of the circle would be printed here. So, this area circle has to be defined. So, within this main within this class area client, we define a method called, we have a method called area circle which would be defined here. So, here you can see that we now write a method, we define a method called area circle. So, this in the area circle will actually create an RPC client, XML RPC client. So, I told you that there is a class called XML RPC client, using which you create an XML RPC client. So, you create a client by giving the you need to connect this client to the server. So, you have the same server and the client are running in the local host. So, give the local host address and the port number where the server is running. It is running in the port number 8899. So, first once you create an client XML RPC client, you have to send the double value. So, any value can be sent as a can be sent as a vector object. So, what you have to do is you have to create a vector object. So, params is a vector object, you are creating it, and use the add element method of the vector class to add the double value to the params. So, you have to bind this parameter, you have to pass to the remote procedure as a vector object. So, use a method called add element and then bind give your radius, that is the radius that is converted to a double value, and add it to the vector. So, once you add it to the vector, now you use the method called execute method of the client. So, client is your XML RPC client. Within this class you have a method called execute. So, the client object dot execute of, you have to when you call the server function, you have to give the registered function name. So, the registered function name is area, and you have to give you also need to know the name of the procedure. So, the name of the procedure is circle area, which we have defined there. So, the registered function name is area dot, the name of the function is given as circle area, and to this function you have to pass the params. Params is a vector object. So, you have put the double value within this vector object and you have used it within this execute method. So, once you call this execute method, that would actually call the server function, would execute it and it would send back the result. So, the result would be an object, it would be of an object type. So, what you have to do is you have to print it as a double value. So, this object has to be first converted to string. So, you make use of the toString method to convert the object to a string, and then again take the string, parse it to a double value, then you will get an area, that is a double value. So, now this function returns the resultant area to the previous method, that is the method which has called it. So, within the main method you have called the area circle passing the radius. So, this would actually create within this area circle, you have created a client program and you have called the remote procedure, get back the result, convert it to the double value, and you are giving back to the main method. So, the client would be actually accessing a remote object just like accessing a local procedure, but the procedure is running in the server side. So, now you can see that how this is actually working. So, as I told you, this XML RPC combines two mechanisms, two protocols called XML and the HTTP protocol. It is based on the two protocols. Now, when the client, when it gives a request to the remote procedure, it makes a function call. So, that procedure call would be converted to an XML message, and it would be sent as a HTTP request to the server. So, now when you execute this program, you can see that a HTTP request will be generated like this. So, it would be a post type, the post type of the HTTP protocol, the content length. So, these are the HTTP header that would be added, and then the name of the function. The name of the function is circle area, the registered name is area. So, this would be sent as an XML message, and the parameter you need to pass to the procedure is also passed as params. This is what you have created. So, as an XML messages, this would be generated and it would be passed as a HTTP request to the server side. And the resultant, if you see, if the server properly does all these processes, it sends back the response back as an HTTP response. So, the client program, you will compile it and you will execute it like this. You will Java area client is a client program, you give the radius as a double value, you will get back the result. And now we have seen that this XML, how to code an XML RPC, it basically works on this model. So, you had a client process, you had a server process, you write a client program and a server program. So, there would be a client process that makes use of a stub, and the stub would actually make use of the network routine, the underlying procedures by which it can communicate to the other end, which is your server side, and in the server side again it makes use of the underlying network routines by which it unmarshals the data, send it to the server stub, and the server stub would initiate the server process, get the result back from the server process, and again use the network routine, and then transmit or marshals the everything to the client side. The client side, it would contact the client step through which it would connect to the client process. So, it is an RPC, same RPC model by which the client is making a remote procedure call to the server machine. So, the steps are given here. So, what the client does is the client calls the local stub procedure, and the stub packages the parameters into a network message, and this is what called as marshalling. And we saw that there is some networking functions in the OS kernel that would be called by the stub to send the message, and the kernel would send the message to the remote system. This may be either connection oriented or connectionless, and now the server stub would respond to this message that is coming to the server side. So, the server stub would unmarshal the arguments from the network message, and then it would execute the local procedure call. The procedure once gets completed, it would return the execution result to the server stub. The server stub would again pack everything and returns the values through the network routines, that is as a network messages into a network message. The return messages are sent back, and the client stub would read back the messages using the network functions. The message whatever received in the client stub would be unmarshaled, and the return values would be sent to the local process that is running in the client side, the client program. So, this is what happening when a remote procedure is invoked from a client in a server. So, now we have said that there is a stub, client side stub and a server side stub. So, the client side stub would connect to the remote machine, it would send all the parameters and it would wait for the replies, and it would do the right thing to the stack, and then it would return it. The server side stub in turn would read the parameters, present them in a suitable form to execute the procedure locally, and once the execution is completed, it would send the results back to the calling process. So, you need to make use of, it's the same RPC, RMA, all are the same mechanisms, remote procedure call mechanism, which makes use of a client stub and a server stub. And the basic process for building server would be, you will have a server program, that defines a server's interface using an IDL. IDL is an interface definition language, and this IDL would specify the params, names and the type for all the server procedures. And a stub compiler would read the IDL and produces two stub procedures, one for the client side and one for the server side. The server would write a server program and link it with the server side stub, and the client would write a client program and it would link it with the client side stub. So, you have a basic server some service that would be binded to the interface definition language, and a stub compiler would compile, would read the IDL, whatever service that is binded to the IDL, and then would produce two stubs that would be linked to the client side and the server side as stubs, client side stub and the server side stub. Now, the binding is actually done in the server side. So, RPC binding is done in the server side. So, the server, when it starts up, it exports its interface, identifying itself to the network name server and telling the local runtime its dispatcher address. And the client, before issuing any calls, it has to import the server, which causes the RPC runtime to look up the server through the services that are offered by the server and contact the requested server to set up a connection. So, this is how a binding happens between the client and the server. Now, this is an example of the request, how the request is sent from the client to the server side. So, as I told you, when a client program gets executed, it would send the request as an HTTP request. So, the entire message would be the entire whatever the function name, the server, the service that is running in the server side, and the parameters that has to be passed or converted to XML messages, and this XML message would be sent as an HTTP request to the server. And what the header, what the requirements in the header, what are the important thing we need to have in the header. So, here the format of the URI is not specified, even it could be empty, and if it is actually handling a mixture of incoming HTTP requests, then we need to have the URI to route the request properly to the other end. Otherwise, the URI is not very essential, but the user agent and the host must be specified, and the content type should be text or XML, and the content length must be specified and it should be correct. So, now why we go for XML RPC? The advantages are the firewall software can watch for post whose content type is text bar XML. So, it has an inbuilt firewall, and the XML RPC is also doing a discoverable process. So, it should be possible for the HTML coder to be able to look at a file containing an procedure call and understand what it is doing, and it is very easy to implement. This mechanism is very easy, it should be very easy to implement. But the disadvantages of this mechanism XML RPC. So, here we can see that it can transmit and obese in its message size. It can be the type of data, and it transmits messages which lacks statefulness, and it also incurs channel bottleneck. And compared to SOAP, this XML RPC lacks both security mechanisms and a robust object model. So, you do not pass as objects, you pass as messages. As a data representation, XML RPC is very slow and it is very cumbersome when you see the request how it is sent, and it is incomplete compared to the native programming language mechanism like Java. So, these are the basic disadvantages of XML RPC, but it is very to learn about RPC, it is where this mechanism is the basic one by which you can easily know how RPC is working. So, we can summarize that this module we have seen that how an XML what is XML RPC, and we have seen that how this XML RPC is working, and we have also seen about the advantages and disadvantages with XML RPC. We saw a small example to work with XML RPC. So, these are the references. Thank you.